No one believed it when he accepted an alien as paymen, until she revealed her crown. The setting sun stained the sky orange over the Arizona desert, where dust danced in the hot air of a summer evening. In Tucson, a city pulsing with the raw energy of the American Southwest, Jack Harper pulled his rusty Chevy pickup in front of the Desert Rose Cantina, a roadside bar with flickering neon lights and the muffled sound of a jukebox playing Johnny Cash. Jack, a 34-year-old man with a scruffy beard and tired eyes, wasn't exactly a hero. He was a space scrap dealer, one of many who, since first contact in 2035, made a living reselling parts from alien ships that fell to Earth. 10 years after the arrival of the Clythar, an alien species with iridescent skin and constellation-like eyes, humanity was still trying to find its place in the universe. The Clythar had set up trade zones in cities like Tucson, but integration wasn't nearly as peaceful as politicians like to claim on TV. Prejudice, fear, and distrust hung thick in the air, just like the desert dust. Jack, however, didn't care about intergalactic politics. He just wanted to pay his bills. That night, he walked into the Desert Rose to close a deal with a Clythar trader named Vrenthak, a 2-meter-tall guy with pulsating tentacles on his back. The bar was packed. Truckers, bounty hunters, and a few tourists curious about alien contact. Jack sat at a table in the back, the cracked leather of the seat creaking under his weight. He popped open a Coors beer and waited. Vrenthak arrived late, dragging a hooded figure behind him. The creature, or person, was small, maybe 5 feet tall, wrapped in a gray cloak that hid their features. Jack frowned. He'd expected engine parts, not this. Harper, Vrenthak said, his voice a deep rumble translated by the universal implant in his neck. The parts you wanted? Damaged. But I brought something better. He pushed the hooded figure forward. She pays my debt. Jack nearly choked on his beer. I don't deal in slaves, Vren. I'm a scrapper, not a trafficker. She's not a slave. Vrenthak shot back, his eyes sparkling like stars. It's a trade. She's Clythar. Useful. Knows things. You take her, or we call it even. Jack looked at the hooded figure. Something about her posture, tense shoulders, lowered head, felt off. He'd heard stories of Clythar trafficking their own, but never thought he'd get involved. Still, Vrenthak's debt was 50 grand in parts Jack had already promised to a client in Phoenix. He couldn't walk away empty-handed. Show me your face, Jack said, leaning forward. The figure hesitated, then pulled back the hood. Jack held his breath. She was a female Clythar, but unlike any he'd ever seen. Her skin was a silvery blue, softly glowing under the dim bar light. Her eyes, large and luminous, seemed to hold entire galaxies. She didn't have the species' usual tentacles, but long filaments like hair, pulsing with gentle lights. She was beautiful, in a way Jack couldn't explain. What's your name? He asked, his voice softer than he intended. She looked at Vrenthak, who made a sharp gesture. Speak, ordered the alien. Lyrian, she said, her voice melodic but trembling. The implant translated, but Jack sensed something in her tone that no technology could convey. Fear. Jack rubbed the back of his neck, the desert heat suddenly feeling suffocating. He didn't want this. Didn't want to get involved in whatever this was. But something in Lyrian's eyes made him hesitate. He recognized that look, the same one he saw in the mirror after sleepless nights, when debts and loneliness weighed heavy. All right, he said finally, but no chains, no cages. She comes with me as a passenger. Got it. Vrenthak chuckled, the sound like Rolling Stones. As you wish, human. She's yours now. Lyrian said nothing, but her eyes met Jack's for a brief moment. There was something there, gratitude, maybe, or something deeper. Jack didn't know. All he knew was that stepping out of the bar with Lyrian by his side, the desert seemed wider and more dangerous than ever. The pickup rumbled down Highway 86 beneath a sky now dotted with stars. Jack glanced at Lyrian, sitting stiffly in the passenger seat, her glowing filaments reflecting the dashboard light. You okay? He asked, not sure why he cared. She turned her face to the window, eyes fixed on the horizon. You don't know what you've gotten into, she whispered. Jack shivered. He wanted to ask what she meant, but something in her voice made him swallow the words. Instead, he gripped the wheel tighter and accelerated, the engine's roar swallowing the heavy silence between them. Highway 86 sliced through the desert like a black scar beneath the starry sky. The rumble of Jack's truck echoed in the vastness, but inside the cab, the silence between him and Lyrian was almost tangible. He stole quick glances at her, trying to decipher the mysterious figure beside him. Lyrian's luminous filaments pulsed gently, lighting the interior with a glow that seemed alive, responding to the rhythm of her breathing. Jack didn't know if it was fascinating or unsettling. So, he began, clearing his throat to break the silence. "Where are you headed before? You know, Vrinthak brought you here." He tried to sound casual, but the question came out awkward. Lyrian didn't answer right away. Her eyes, big and shining like nebulae, stayed fixed on the darkness outside the window. "Doesn't matter," she said at last, voice low but firm. "You shouldn't have taken the deal." Jack frowned, fingers gripping the steering wheel tight. "Look, I didn't ask to buy you, or whatever that was. I just wanted my parts. But I'm not going to treat you like property, all right? You're free to go whenever you want." She slowly turned her head, and for the first time, Jack felt the full weight of that gaze. It wasn't just alien beauty. There was an intensity that made him feel like he was being sized up, judged. "Free," she repeated, with a hint of bitterness. "You don't get it, Jack Harper. It's not about what you want. It's about what's already been done." He opened his mouth to ask what she meant, but a sudden flash in the rear view caught his attention. Headlights. 2 pairs, closing in way too fast to be regular truckers. "Shit," he muttered, years of dealing with shady desert deals kicking in. "Hold on." Jack hit the gas and the truck roared, kicking up dust. Lyrian grabbed the seat, her filaments glowing brighter, like they were reacting to the danger. "Who are they?" she asked, voice tense. "Don't know," Jack replied, eyes darting between the road and the mirror. "But nobody chases a '98 Chevy like this just to say hi." He turned on the radio, tuning to a local frequency scrappers used for alerts. Static. Bad sign. The headlights got closer, revealing 2 black SUVs. No plates, tinted windows. Jack knew the type. Bounty hunters, or worse, agents from some corp cashing in on black market alien tech. Since first contact, Tucson had become a hot spot for this kind of trouble, and Jack had his share. "Lyrian," he said, keeping his voice steady, "if you know anything that's got these guys after us, now's the time to speak up." She hesitated, her filaments pulsing in a frantic rhythm. "They're not after you," she whispered. "They're after me." Jack felt his stomach drop. "Why? What did you do?" Before she could answer, one of the SUVs sped up and cut alongside, trying to match the truck's pace. Jack swerved, throwing the truck onto the shoulder and kicking up a cloud of dust that blocked the pursuer's view. "Hold tight," he shouted as he maneuvered back onto the road. Lyrian gripped the dashboard, eyes wide. "It's not what I did," she said, voice trembling but growing firm. "It's who I am." Jack didn't have time to process. A sharp electronic whine cut through the air, his teeth clenched. The truck started to shudder, engine sputtering. "Damn it, EMP." He slammed the wheel as the vehicle slowed, dying, sliding to a stop by the roadside. The SUVs pulled up a few yards behind, doors opening with military precision. 4 figures stepped out, dressed in black tactical gear, holding weapons Jack recognized as hybrids. Human tech mixed with Clythar designs. One of them, a bald man with scars on his face, stepped forward. "Hand over the Clythar. Harper," he said coldly. "We don't want trouble." Jack glanced at Lyrian, who was stiff, her filaments now glowing with a nearly blinding intensity. He didn't know who she really was, but something in that man's tone made Jack clench his fists. "If you know my name," Jack said, forcing a sarcastic smile, "you know I don't hand anyone over." The bald man laughed, drying hard. "You have no idea what you're getting into, Scrapper. She's not just any Clythar." Lyrian touched Jack's arm, surprisingly warm. "Don't fight for me," she whispered. "You'll die." Jack looked in her eyes, pleading, but also filled with something he couldn't name. Strength, maybe, or desperation. He wasn't a hero, never wanted to be. But leaving Lyrian to those guys felt wrong in a way he couldn't ignore. "Stay behind me," he said, grabbing the rusty lug wrench off the truck floor. It wasn't much against alien weapons, but it was all he had. The bald man raised his gun. "Last chance, Harper. Before Jack could answer, Lyrian stepped forward, her filaments shining like a beacon. "Stop," she commanded, her voice echoing with an authority that even made Jack freeze. The men hesitated, weapons lowering slightly. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," she continued, eyes sparking. "I am not your prey." The bald man narrowed his eyes, but before he could respond, a deep sound rolled through the desert, like distant thunder. Something was coming. Something big. The distant thunder grew louder, a roar that seemed to shake the desert floor. Jack gripped the lug wrench tight, knuckles white, staring down the four-armed men in front of him. Arizona dust swirled in the headlights of the black SUVs, painting a scene straight out of an action movie. But this wasn't a movie. It was real, and the fear squeezing Jack's chest was as tangible as the heat still rising from the asphalt. Lyrian stood beside him, filaments glowing so bright they nearly outshone the headlights. Her stance had changed, no longer the hooded, scared figure from the Desert Rose Cantina. There was power in her eyes, a determination that made Jack wonder once again who she really was. The bald leader took a step back, weapon still aimed, but his face now showing a mix of caution and confusion. "You hear that?" one of the other men said, a skinny guy with a southern drawl, looking up at the dark sky. The roar was closer now, a mechanical sound mixed with something organic, like the heartbeat of a giant. Before anyone could react, a colossal shadow crossed the sky, blotting out the stars. A Clythar ship, not one of the usual trading vessels, but something bigger, more angular, with red lights pulsing across its hull like veins. It hovered above them, the air vibrating with the energy from its thrusters. Jack felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. "Lyrian," he murmured, eyes locked on the ship. "What's going on?" She didn't answer, but her filaments glowed even brighter, and Jack realized the light wasn't random. It was a pattern, like a code. The ship responded with an identical pulse of light, and the bald guy shouted, "She's calling for backup. Open fire." Jack's instinct screamed louder than his fear. He grabbed Lyrian's arm and pulled her behind the pickup as bursts of energy sliced through the air, leaving smoking scorch marks on the ground. "Get down," he ordered, heart pounding. He didn't know why he was protecting an alien he barely knew, but something about her, maybe those eyes that seemed to carry the weight of a universe, kept him from walking away. The ship above let out a high-pitched sound, and a ramp lowered on its side. Figures descended, not human, but Clythar, soldiers, judging by their metallic armor reflecting moonlight. Their tentacles moved with precision, holding weapons that looked alive, pulsing with energy. The bald guy and his men fell back, firing wildly, but the Clythar moved fast, like liquid shadows. "Lyrian," Jack yelled as an explosion nearby kicked up dirt over them. "Did you call those guys? Are they friends or enemies?" She looked at him, her face lit by the chaos around them. "They came for me," she said, voice steady but tinged with pain. "But they're not friends." Jack cursed under his breath. "Then why are you glowing like a beacon? You're making their job easier." "I can't help it," she said, touching the filaments with trembling fingers. "It's who I am. They track me because of it." Before Jack could ask more, one of the Clythar soldiers stepped forward, eyes glowing like embers. He spoke in a language Jack's implant translated as a roar. "Lyrian, the daughter of Zoran, you have been found. Surrender, or this human dies." Jack felt his blood run cold. Daughter of Zoran? He had no idea who Zoran was, but the title sounded important enough to bring a warship into the Arizona desert. He looked at Lyrian, expecting an explanation, but she just pressed her lips tight, her eyes full of a conflict he didn't understand. "Let him go," Lyrian told the soldier, standing slowly. "He has nothing to do with this." The Clythar laughed, a sound that made Jack's teeth grind. "He took you as payment. He's an accomplice, and traitors don't bargain." Jack saw the barrel of the alien weapon rise, aimed at his chest. Time seemed to slow. He wasn't a hero, never wanted to be. His life was a string of bad choices and risky deals, but right then, he knew he couldn't let Lyrian face this alone. Not after what he'd seen in her eyes at the bar, not after feeling the weight of her hand on his arm. Without thinking, he lunged at the Clythar soldier, swinging the crowbar like a club. The impact was solid, but the alien barely flinched, its armor absorbing the blow. Jack felt a sharp pain in his shoulder as the Clythar grabbed him and slammed him against the truck, metal buckling on impact. He hit the ground, the air knocked out his lungs. "Jack!" Lyrian shouted, running to him. She knelt by his side, filaments glowing so bright they momentarily blinded the soldier. "Why did you do that?" she whispered, eyes wide. "You didn't have to." "Because," Jack gasped, pain making it hard to speak. "Because you don't deserve to be treated like merchandise." For a brief moment, Lyrian's eyes softened, and Jack saw something beyond fear and strength. Gratitude, maybe something deeper. But the moment was cut short by the sound of heavy boots. More Clythar soldiers approached, and the humans, now cornered, shouted orders to each other. "Lyrian," the Clythar leader said, stepping forward. "Come with us, or everyone here dies." Jack struggled to his feet, leaning against the truck. He looked at Lyrian, then the ship, then the dark desert stretching around them. They could try to run, but where? He didn't know who Lyrian really was, but it was clear she was more than just a slave. And now, he was caught in something much bigger than a scrap deal. "Lyrian," he said hoarsely, "if you have a plan, now's the time." She looked at him, filaments pulsing slowly, as if making a decision. "Trust me," she said, low enough for only him to hear. "But it's going to cost you." Jack laughed despite the pain. "My life's already a debt. What's one more?" The desert dust swirled like a veil beneath the red glow of the Clythar ship, hovering like a predator ready to strike. Jack, still dizzy from the blow against the truck, felt his shoulder throb but gripped the crowbar tight, as if it could protect him from the alien weapons aimed his way. Lyrian stood beside him, her filaments shining with a light that seemed to defy the darkness of Arizona. Her eyes, full of galaxies, met his for a moment, and Jack shivered. Not from fear, but something he couldn't name. The Clythar leader, his armor pulsing like a living organism, stepped forward. "Lyrian, our daughter of Zoran, your escape ends here," he said, his voice metallic from the implant's translation. "You belong to the Star Circle. Return, or this planet will pay the price." Jack blinked, trying to process the words. Daughter of Zoran. Star Circle. He had no idea what it meant, but those words carried weight. Lyrian wasn't just any Clythar. He looked at her, waiting for an explanation, but she was focused on the soldier, her filaments pulsing in a rhythm that felt like a challenge. "You have no claim over me," Lyrian said, her voice steady, but with a tremor that betrayed her emotions. "I chose my own path, and it's not with you." The Clythar leader tilted his head, like her answer was both expected and unacceptable. He raised his hand, and the other soldiers moved forward, their weapons humming, making the air vibrate. The human men, the bounty hunters who had been chasing Jack and Lyrian, were now cornered, their guns lowered, clearly outmatched by alien tech. The bald guy shouted something about negotiating, but the Clythar ignored him. Jack moved closer to Lyrian, his voice low. "You said you had a plan. What is it?" She hesitated, eyes flicking toward the ship above them. "There's a way," she whispered, "but you have to trust me. And you have to let me touch you." Jack frowned. "Touch? What do you mean?" "We don't have time," she said, urgency cutting through the air. "It's the only way to get out of here. But you might not like what happens next." The Clythar leader stepped forward, weapon aimed straight at Jack. "Enough talk. Hand her over, human, or die." Jack looked at Lyrian, heart pounding. He wasn't a hero, never wanted to be. His life was a string of risky deals, mounting debts, and lonely nights in the desert. But there, under the weight of that moment, something inside him shifted. Maybe it was the way Lyrian looked at him, as if he was more than just some scrap dealer. Maybe it was that, for the first time in years, he felt like his choices mattered. "All right," he said, voice rough. "Do what you have to do." Lyrian didn't hesitate. She reached out, her delicate fingers touching Jack's chest, right over his racing heart. A wave of heat washed over him, like being dipped in liquid light. Her filaments glowed with a blinding intensity, and for a moment, Jack felt everything. The desert, the ship, fear, anger, and something deeper. The mind of Lyrian, like an ocean of memories and feelings connecting to his. He saw flashes of distant worlds, cities floating among stars, and a shining crown inside a crystal chamber. Then the pain hit, sharp and overwhelming, like his body was being torn apart and rebuilt. When he opened his eyes, he wasn't in the desert anymore. He was inside a small, metallic chamber with walls that seemed to pulse with life. Lyrian was beside him, breathing hard, her filaments now dimmed, like she'd drained all her energy. Jack felt the floor vibrate under his feet. They were inside the Clythar ship. "Ow," he started, voice weak. "Teleportation," Lyrian said, leaning against the wall. "A trick my people don't like me to use. But we're not safe yet." Jack looked around, heart still racing from the connection he just felt with her. "What was that?" "I saw things. Worlds. A crown." She looked away, almost embarrassed. "You saw pieces of me. Who I was. Before I ran." "Running from what?" Jack asked, frustration growing. "Who are you, Lyrian?" "They called you Daughter of Zoran." "What does that mean?" Before she could answer, an alarm blared, a piercing sound that made Jack's teeth grind. The chamber door opened, and 2 Clythar soldiers stepped in, weapons raised. Lyrian moved in front of Jack, her filaments glowing again, but weaker this time. "Stay behind me," she said, voice trembling with exhaustion. Jack grabbed his wrench, miraculously still with him. "I'm not letting you fight alone," he said, even though he knew his chances against alien soldiers were slim. Then Lyrian did something unexpected. She raised her hands, and a burst of light exploded from her, throwing the soldiers against the wall. They collapsed unconscious, but Lyrian also dropped to her knees, the strength leaving her. Jack caught her before she hit the floor, her body warm and light against his. "You okay?" he asked, heart tight. "I overdid it," she whispered, voice weak. "But we have to reach the ship's core. It's our only chance." Jack looked down the hallway beyond the door, where blinking lights and footsteps echoed. He didn't know what they were up against, but he knew that in that moment, Lyrian was all that mattered. He helped her up, ignoring the pain in his shoulder. "Then let's go," he said. "But you owe me an explanation." She managed a weak smile. "You're braver than you look, Jack Harper." He laughed despite everything. "We're just dumber. If you've ever rooted for an unlikely love or someone who defies the impossible, like Jack and Lyrian, subscribe to the channel for more stories that'll tug at your heart and take you to the stars." The hallway inside the Clythar ship pulsed with a flashing red light, like the heartbeat of an alien creature. Jack was supporting Lyrian, whose body felt lighter than it should, the dull filaments hanging lifeless around her face. The effort to teleport them and take down the soldiers had drained her, and Jack could feel the weight of her fragility, not just physically, but emotionally. He didn't really know who she was, not truly, but what he'd felt during that brief connection still echoed in his mind. Distant worlds, a crown, and a loneliness he knew all too well. "This way," Lyrian murmured, pointing down a corridor to the left, her voice weak but determined. Jack helped her walk, still holding the wrench in his free hand, even though he knew it wouldn't be enough against more Clythar soldiers. The alarm kept blaring, a metallic scream that seemed to pierce his bones. Footsteps echoed in the distance, getting closer. "You said ship core," Jack said quietly as they passed panels glowing with alien symbols. "What's there? An exit? Weapons? Control," she replied, struggling to breathe. "If we get to the core, I can disable the tracking systems. They won't be able to find me anymore." Jack paused for a second, looking at her. "Tracking? You mean this whole ship's after you because of what? Those glowing filaments? Who are you, Lyrian?" She looked away, her eyes once full of galaxies now dull, as if carrying a burden she didn't want to share. "I'll tell you," she said, almost a whisper, "but not now. Please, Jack, just help me get there." He wanted to press her, demand answers, but the sound of doors opening down the hall made him swallow the words. "All right," he said, squeezing her arm gently. "But after this, you owe me the truth." They moved forward, the corridor narrowing, the walls pulsing with an energy that made Jack's skin tingle. He didn't understand Clythar technology, but he could feel the ship was more than metal and circuits. It was alive somehow, and it didn't like the being there. Lyrian stumbled, and Jack caught her, feeling the warmth of her skin through the thin cloak. For a moment, their eyes met, and he saw something that disarmed him, vulnerability mixed with fierce determination. You didn't have to do that, she said, her voice trembling. You didn't have to protect me back there. Why risk your life for me? Jack shrugged, trying to ignore the tightness in his chest. Maybe because I know what it's like to feel cornered, he said, thinking about debts, lonely nights in his truck, the emptiness that had haunted him since leaving Tucson behind. Or maybe I'm just stupid. She gave a faint smile, and for a second, the chaos around them seemed less suffocating. But the moment was broken by a loud crash. A door ahead swung open, and 3 Clythar soldiers appeared, their armor glowing red. Lyrian Nar, the leader bellowed, weapon raised. You cannot run from the star circle. Jack pulled Lyrian behind a panel, his heart pounding. Got any bright ideas? He whispered. She closed her eyes, the filaments trembling like they were trying to glow again. I can try another energy wave, she said, but it'll cost me. Maybe everything. Jack felt a chill run down his spine. Everything? What do you mean? My strength, she said, opening her eyes. My connection to my people. If I use it again, I might fade away. Permanently. He stared at her, the weight of those words dropping on him like a stone. He didn't know what fade away meant, but her tone made it clear it was serious. No, he said firmly. You're not doing that. There has to be another way. There's no time, she insisted, eyes pleading. They're going to kill you, Jack, and I can't let that happen. Before he could argue, the soldiers opened fire, blasts of energy melting the panel next to them. Jack acted on instinct, pulling Lyrian down and rolling into another corridor. Ahead, he saw a hatch marked with Clythar symbols. Is that an exit? He asked, breathless. No, Lyrian said, struggling to stand. It's a maintenance chamber, but might buy us time. Jack didn't hesitate. He sprinted to the hatch, dragging Lyrian with him, and banged the wrench against the control panel. Surprisingly, the door opened, and they dove inside, the hatch sealing behind them with a hiss. The space was cramped, filled with pulsating tubes and dim lights. For a moment, they were safe, but Jack knew it was only temporary. He turned to Lyrian, who was leaning against the wall, struggling to breathe. You okay? He asked, kneeling beside her. She shook her head, the dull filaments falling over her face. I brought this on you, she said, her voice full of guilt. You could be out in your truck, free, not caught up in this war. Jack laughed, despite everything. Free? I was buried in debt and running from trouble long before I met you. At least now it's interesting. She looked at him, surprised. Then something shifted in her expression. You're different, she said, almost to herself. The humans I met before, they just wanted to use my people. You don't. Jack looked away, uncomfortable with the weight of her words. I'm no saint, he muttered, but I'm not going to leave you to those guys. For a moment, the silence between them was louder than the ship's alarm. Then Lyrian touched his hand, warm and electric. Thank you, she said, and Jack felt something inside him break, a wall he didn't even know was there. But the moment was shattered by a loud bang. The hatch began to glow, as if being cut from the other side. They're coming, Lyrian said, her voice tense. We need to keep moving. The core isn't far. Jack helped her to her feet, his shoulders still aching, but adrenaline pushing him forward. He didn't know what he'd gotten himself into, but for the first time in years, he felt like he was fighting for something bigger than himself. The air inside the maintenance chamber was thick, buzzing low as if the metal walls of the Clythar ship were vibrating. Jack held Lyrian by the arm, helping her keep balance as they ran down a narrow corridor lit only by the faint glow of pulsating tubes lining the walls like veins. The hatch behind them still shook under attack from the soldiers, metal sizzling as it was cut by energy weapons. Time was running out, but Jack felt something new growing inside, a determination he didn't recognize, as if Lyrian's presence had lit a fire long extinguished. This way, Lyrian said, her voice weak but steady, pointing down a passage to the right. Her filaments, now almost dim, swayed slightly, and Jack realized she was barely holding herself up. Whatever she'd done to teleport them and take out the soldiers in Block 4 had come at a heavy cost. Still, she kept going, and that made Jack want to keep going too. You holding on? He asked as they passed a panel radiating a faint heat. He didn't understand Clythar biology, but her face, if you could call it that, looked pale, her eyes less bright. For now, she answered with a half-smile that felt more human than Jack expected. But I'm not gonna lie, Jack Harper, I'm at my limit. He nodded, quickening his pace. Then let's get to that core before you pass out for good. And seriously, stop calling me Jack Harper. Just Jack is fine. She looked at him, surprised, then laughed. A soft, melodic sound that felt out of place amid the chaos. Jack, then, she said, and there was something in the way she said his name that tightened his chest. The corridor opened into a larger chamber with a vaulted ceiling glowing with floating Clythar, symbols like holograms. In the center, a translucent pillar pulsed with blue light, like a giant heart. The core, Lyrian whispered, eyes wide. It's here. Jack looked around, wrench still in hand, though he knew it was useless against the technology surrounding them. All right, now what? You press a button and shut off the tracker. It's not that simple, she said, stepping hesitantly toward the pillar. I need to connect with it, but that will expose who I am. They'll know exactly where I am. Jack frowned. They? Who, Lyrian? The soldiers? The Star Circle? You've got to tell me what's going on. She stopped, hands hovering over the pillar, then turned to him. For the first time, Jack saw more than strength or fear in her eyes. There was guilt and a sadness so deep he almost stepped back. I'm Lyrian Thar, she said quietly, daughter of Zoran, the last ruler of the Star Circle. My people, I was kind of a princess, as you'd say, but I ran away, because what they wanted from me, I couldn't give. Jack blinked, trying to process. Princess? Like an alien queen? And you were being sold as a slave because... Why exactly? It wasn't supposed to be like that, she said, her filaments trembling slightly. I hid on Earth, disguised to escape the Circle. They want to use me, my connection to the Star Core, which powers our ships, our cities. But Vrinthak, that Clythar from the bar, he found me. He betrayed me. Jack rubbed the back of his neck, the weight of the revelation sinking in. So when I accepted you as payment, I walked right into an alien war. Not a war, she corrected. A hunt. They don't want to kill me, Jack. They want to take me back. But if they do, everything I've tried to protect will be destroyed. He stared at her, heart racing. Protect what? She hesitated, then touched the pillar, and the blue light flared, reflecting in her eyes. Freedom, she said. Not just mine. All the Clythar who refused to live under the Circle's rule. Before Jack could respond, the sound of ripping metal echoed through the chamber. The opposite door exploded open, and 5 Clythar soldiers entered, led by one who looked bigger, with longer tentacles and armor studded with glowing crystals. Lyrian Thar, he roared. You cannot escape your destiny. Jack stepped in front of Lyrian, wrench raised, though he knew it was ridiculous. Stay behind me, he said firmly, even though fear was pumping through his veins. Jack, no, Lyrian said, pulling him back. You can't fight them, and you're not going to wipe yourself out for me. He shot back, remembering what she said about the cost of using her power. He looked at the pillar, then the soldiers. Tell me what to do, how to help you. Lyrian looked at him, her eyes shining with a mix of surprise and gratitude. You're already helping, she said softly, more than you realize. She took a deep breath and placed her hands on the pillar. Hold my hand. It's going to hurt, but we have to do this together. Jack didn't hesitate. He grabbed her hand, feeling her warmth like an electric shock. The light from the pillar exploded, surrounding them both, and Jack felt that connection again. Lyrian's memories, her pain, her fight. But this time, he also felt something coming from himself. Courage. Not like a movie hero's, but the kind that comes when you finally choose to fight for something bigger than yourself. The light spread, and the soldiers pulled back, temporarily blinded. The pillars started to vibrate, and Lyrian murmured something in her language, the filaments glowing with an effort that seemed to tear her apart inside. It's working, she said, her voice tight. The tracker, it's shutting down. But before she could finish, the Clythar leader fired a burst of energy. Jack pulled Lyrian to the side, and the shot hit the pillar, which let out a mechanical groan. The chamber shook, cracks spreading across the walls. We have to get out of here, Jack shouted, holding Lyrian as she stumbled. No, she said, eyes fixed on the pillar. I have to finish, or we'll never be free. Jack looked at her, then at the soldiers closing in. He knew if they stayed, they might not make it out alive. But he also knew Lyrian wouldn't give up. And, somehow, he didn't want to either. The core of the Clythar ship trembled like a living thing, the cracks in the walls growing wider as blue sparks flew from the central pillar. Jack gripped Lyrian's hand tightly, feeling her heat pulse against his skin, like their connection was more than just physical. The pillar's light surrounded them both, and Lyrian's filaments glowed so brightly they lit up the chamber, even as the floor beneath them seemed ready to collapse. The Clythar leader, decked out in crystal-studded armor, advanced with his soldiers, their weapons pulsing with red energy, ready to fire. "Lyrian, there!" the leader bellowed, his voice booming over the ship's shrill alarm. "You cannot destroy the core. It's the key to the Star Circle, to our people." Lyrian, still connected to the pillar, trembled with exhaustion, her eyes flashing with a mix of determination and pain. "Your circle enslaves our people," she shouted back, fury dripping from her voice like Jack had never heard before. "I will not be your tool." Jack felt the pillar's energy vibrating through Lyrian's hand like an electric shock that threatened to swallow him whole. He saw flashes again, her memories, a crystal chamber where she wore a crown, voices demanding she sacrifice herself for an empire she didn't believe in. He understood, right then, the weight she carried. She wasn't just a fugitive. She was a rebel, fighting something way bigger than he could imagine. "Lyrian," he said, his voice hoarse and nearly lost in the chaos. "What's happening? Are you destroying the ship?" "Not destroying," she said through clenched teeth as she manipulated the pillar. "Freeing. The core, it controls the tracker. If I shut it down, the circle won't be able to find me, or others like me." "And what happens to the ship?" Jack asked, eyeing the cracks now spreading across the ceiling. Lyrian hesitated, meeting his gaze. "It might not survive." Jack cursed under his breath, heart pounding. "And us?" She didn't answer, but her look said it all. Jack felt a chill run down his spine, but also a strange clarity. He wasn't a hero, never wanted to be. But right there, on a crashing alien ship, he knew he couldn't leave her. The soldiers fired, energy blasts cutting through the air. Jack pulled Lyrian aside as a shot hit the pillar, which emitted a sharp, pained cry, like it was alive and hurting. The chamber shook violently, chunks of ceiling falling. "Finish it," Jack yelled, holding her as they dodged falling debris. Lyrian nodded, her filaments glowing almost blindingly. She pressed her hands against the pillar, and Jack felt their connection intensify. It was like he could see inside her, the fight, the hope, the fear of failure. He squeezed her hand harder, like he could lend her his own strength, however small. "You're not alone," he said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. "I'm here." Lyrian looked at him, surprised, then a sad smile crossed her face. "You're more than you think, Jack." Before he could say anything else, the Clythar leader charged forward, tentacles whipping like whips. "Traitors!" he roared, raising his weapon. Jack acted on instinct, throwing the wrench with all his might. The metal hit the Clythar's weapon, diverting the shot, which exploded against the wall and sent more debris flying. "Now!" Jack shouted, pulling Lyrian behind a panel for cover. But she didn't move. She was fixed on the pillar, her filaments pulsing in sync with the blue light, now turning white and blinding. "It's done," she whispered, as the pillar let out a sound like a scream. The light exploded, filling the entire chamber, and the Clythar soldiers recoiled, screaming in their language. Jack felt the floor give way beneath his feet, and for a moment, he thought all was lost. But then the light faded, and the alarm stopped. The silence was deafening. The pillar was dark, its symbols gone. Lyrian collapsed into Jack's arms, her filaments dull, her body limp as if every ounce of her had been drained. "Lyrian," Jack exclaimed, holding her carefully. He checked her pulse, or what he thought was a pulse, since Clythar biology was still a mystery. She was alive, but weak, her eyes half closed. The Clythar leader, still standing, stared at the darkened pillar, his tentacles trembling with rage. "Destroyed everything," he said, his voice now a whisper heavy with hatred. "The circle will hunt you to the ends of the universe." "Let them come," Jack said firmly, holding Lyrian against his chest. He didn't know where this courage came from, but for the first time, He felt like he was fighting for something worth it. The ship shook again, a low roar warning that collapse was imminent. Jack looked around, searching for an exit. He spotted a hatch in the corner of the chamber, marked with a symbol resembling a star. "This way," he said, carrying Lyrian in his arms. She was light, almost fragile, but he still felt her strength even in that state. The soldiers tried to advance, but the chamber was crumbling, and they hesitated, as if the core's failure shook them. Jack didn't wait to find out more. He sprinted to the hatch and kicked it hard until it gave way, revealing a narrow corridor leading to an escape pod. He placed Lyrian inside, fastening the straps around her before sitting in the seat next to her. "Hold on tight," he said, even though she was barely conscious. He pulled a lever, praying his experience with space junk would be useful. The pod shot out of the ship, the impact throwing Jack against the seat. He looked through the small window, watching the Clythar ship shatter in a silent explosion against the starry Arizona sky. The pod crashed in the desert, the jolt rattling his bones, but they were alive. Jack looked at Lyrian, who slowly opened her eyes. "Did we make it?" she whispered. "For now," he said with a tired smile. "But something tells me this isn't over." The Arizona desert was silent, except for the distant crackling of the Clythar ship wreckage burning like a bonfire under the stars. The escape pod had landed, or rather, crashed, a few miles off Highway 86, leaving a trail of churned earth in the dry soil. Jack Harper, covered in dust and with his shoulder throbbing, kicked open the hatch, the cool night air rushing into the stuffy cabin. He looked at Lyrian, still strapped in, the dull filaments drooping over her face like lifeless hair. She was conscious but weak, her half-open eyes faintly glowing with that starry shimmer that had fascinated him from the start. "Hey," he said, carefully unbuckling her. "You all right?" Lyrian gave a weak nod, her voice hoarse. "More or less," she murmured, tried to sit up, but collapsing back against the seat. "The core, it's destroyed. They can't track me now." Jack helped her out of the pod, her arm light around his shoulders. He looked toward the horizon, where the orange glow from the wreckage lit up the night. "What about those soldiers? The Star Circle? Will they come back?" She hesitated, eyes fixed on the distant fire. "I don't know," she admitted. "The Circle is persistent, but for now we're free." Jack snorted, a tired laugh escaping him. "Free?" That word started to sound kind of strange. He led her to a nearby rock, where she sat down, breathing hard. He crouched in front of her, examining her under the moonlight. "You almost killed yourself back there. Why didn't you tell me how dangerous it was?" Lyrian looked away, the filaments trembling slightly as if trying to regain their glow. "Because you wouldn't have let me do it," she said softly but firmly. "And I had to, not just for me, but for all the others the Circle controls." Jack rubbed the back of his neck, desert dust sticking to his sweaty skin. He wanted to understand, to know everything about the Star Circle, about who she really was. But right then, all that mattered was that they were alive. "So you're a princess, huh?" he said, half joking, half serious. "Should I bow or something?" She laughed, a weak but genuine sound that made Jack's chest tighten. "I'm not a princess anymore," she said, meeting his eyes. "Now, I'm just Lyrian, and thanks to you, I'm still here." He looked at her, feeling something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't just relief or adrenaline. It was something deeper, like the desert, the ship, all the chaos had forged a bond he couldn't ignore. "I just did what anyone would have done," he mumbled awkwardly. "No," Lyrian said, touching his hand. The contact was warm, almost electric, even with the filaments faded. "You did more. You trusted me, even without knowing who I was." Silence fell between them, broken only by the desert wind. Jack looked up at the sky, stars shining with a clarity only Arizona could offer. He thought about his life before that night, the debts, the risky deals, the lonely nights in his truck. It all felt distant now, like it belonged to someone else. "So what now?" he finally asked. "You're an intergalactic fugitive. I'm a broke scrapper. What do we do?" Lyrian gazed toward the horizon, where the wreckage's glow was fading. "I don't know," she admitted. "But for the first time, I feel like I get to choose my own path. And I want you to be on it." Jack blinked, surprised. He wasn't good with words, never had been. But the way she looked at him, those eyes carrying whole galaxies. Something inside him just clicked. "All right," he said, with a crooked smile, "but only if you promise not to teleport me onto another ship without warning." She laughed again, this time louder, more alive. "I promise." The sound of distant sirens cut through the air, probably Tucson police or some federal squad drawn by the explosion. Jack stood up, helping Lyrian to her feet. "Time to disappear," he said. "My truck's a few miles out if it's still intact. We could try to make it to Phoenix. I've got a contact there who can hide us." Lyrian nodded, leaning on him as they walked through the desert. Her weight was comforting, like proof that this was all real. "Jack," she said after a few steps, "why did you help me? Back at the bar, on the ship, you could have just run." He stopped, looking at her under the moonlight. "Because you looked at me like I was more than just some guy," he said quietly. "And maybe I wanted that to be true." She didn't answer, but squeezed his hand, and that was enough. They walked toward the highway, the desert wrapping around them like a cloak. Jack's life would never be the same. He knew that. But for the first time in years, he didn't feel the weight of debts or loneliness. He felt purpose. And beside Lyrian, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he could face whatever the universe threw at them. The Arizona sky was starting to lighten on the horizon, stars giving way to the deep blue before dawn. Jack and Lyrian walked through the desert, the sound of their footsteps mixing with the distant fading sirens. Jack's truck, miraculously still intact, came into view, parked by Highway 86 where he'd left it before all the chaos. The rusted metal caught the weak light, a reminder of his old life, a life that now seemed like someone else's. Jack helped Lyrian into the passenger seat, noticing she still trembled slightly, the dull filaments hanging like veils over her shoulders. He grabbed a bottle of water from the glove compartment and offered it to her, which she accepted with a grateful nod. "I don't know if Clythar drink water," he said with a half smile, "but it's what I've got." She took a small sip, her eyes shining with a trace of humor. "It's acceptable," she said, her voice stronger now, though still tired. "Thanks, Jack." He sat behind the wheel, but didn't start the engine right away. Instead, he stared out into the desert, where the glow from the Clythar ship's wreckage had vanished, leaving just a dark patch in the sand. The night felt like a fever dream, the bar, the chase, the ship, the core exploding. But Lyrian, sitting next to him, was real, and that changed everything. "So," he started, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel, "you're a runaway princess. I'm a junk dealer who almost got grilled by aliens. What's the next step?" Lyrian looked at him, her big glowing eyes catching the dawn's light. "I don't know," she admitted softly, but honestly. "For the first time, I don't have a plan, but I feel like I can make one. With you if you want." Jack felt his chest tighten. He wasn't good with feelings, never was. His life had been a string of quick deals, mounting debts, and lonely nights with the Coors and Johnny Cash on the radio. But Lyrian made him want something more, not just for her, but for himself. "You're asking me to be your partner in an intergalactic getaway?" he asked, trying to keep it light. She smiled, a smile that carried the weight of galaxies and, at the same time, the lightness of new hope. "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe I just want someone who sees me as Lyrian, not as Zoran's daughter or a weapon of the Star Circle." Jack looked at her, and for the first time in years, he felt like someone truly saw him, not as a broke junk dealer, but as someone who could make a difference. "All right," he said softly, "but let's make one deal. No more exploding ships for a while, okay?" She laughed, the sound filling the truck's cabin like a melody. "I can't promise that," she said, "but I'll try." He started the engine, the familiar growl of the Chevy breaking the silence. As he drove toward Phoenix, where his contact could hide them for a while, Jack thought about what they'd been through. He'd nearly died more than once. Lyrian had almost sacrificed herself to destroy the Star Circle's tracker. But somehow, they'd come out alive, and more than that, they'd come out together. The road stretched ahead, a straight line cutting through the desert under a sky now bursting with orange and pink hues. Jack looked over at Lyrian, watching the sunrise with a look of wonder, like she'd never seen anything so beautiful. He realized that for her, this was the first dawn of a free life, or at least the freest she'd ever had. "Lyrian," he said hesitantly, What did you mean back on the ship when you talked about protecting the freedom of other Clythar? She turned to him, the filaments beginning to glow again, faint but there. The star circle controls my people, she explained. They use the stellar core, what powers our ships, our cities, to keep everyone obedient. I was the key to it, because of my blood, my connection to the core. But I saw what obedience cost. I saw whole worlds lose their souls. So I ran. And now, without the tracker, maybe others can run too. Jack whistled low, impressed. So you're not just a princess. You're a revolutionary. She laughed, shaking her head. I'm just someone tired of carrying chains, she said. And you, Jack? Who are you now that you're not just some scrapper? He thought for a moment, the wind blowing through the open window, messing up his hair. I don't know, he admitted, but I think I'm starting to figure it out. The silence that followed felt comfortable, like they didn't need words to understand each other. Jack felt something settle inside him. Not an answer, but a promise. He didn't know what the future held, whether the star circle would come after them again, or if he and Lyrian would have to run once more. But for the first time, he wasn't afraid of what was coming. The truck rolled down the road, the desert unfolding around them like a brand new world. Jack glanced over at Lyrian, who was now resting her head against the window, eyes closed, a soft smile on her lips. He knew their journey was just beginning, but for the first time in his life, he felt exactly where he was meant to be. 6 months later, the Arizona desert looked different under the clear winter sky. The scorching heat of summer had given way to a cool breeze, and the distant mountains glowed golden in the afternoon sun. Jack Harper parked his new truck, a Ford F-150, bought with the money from one last scrap deal before leaving Tucson behind, at the driveway of a small adobe house on the outskirts of Sedona. The house was simple, with red earth walls and a tiled roof that blended into the desert. Not fancy, but a home. The first one Jack truly felt was his. He got out of the truck carrying a bag of groceries, coffee, tortillas, some cans of chili, and a pack of cookies he knew Lyrian loved, even though she insisted human food was curiously primitive. He smiled thinking about her, a habit he'd gotten used to over the past few months. Inside the house, Lyrian sat in a wooden chair near the window, her filaments softly glowing again, healed after weeks of rest. She wore a loose t-shirt Jack had bought at a souvenir shop in Phoenix, with a smiling cactus on it that she found hilarious. Her eyes, still filled with galaxies, were fixed on a tablet where she read news about ship sightings in the desert. Since the Clythar core was destroyed, the Star Circle's activity had quieted down, but she never let her guard down. I brought your cookies, Jack said, setting the bag down on the rough wooden table. And some decent coffee, for a change. Lyrian looked at him, a gentle smile curling her lips. You're trying to corrupt me with these sugar circles? She asked, her voice laced with humor Jack had grown to love. Yeah, and it's working, he shot back, sitting down beside her. He looked out the window, where the vast, silent desert stretched beyond. Any news from your intergalactic friends? She shook her head, the filaments pulsing faintly. Nothing. The circle's quiet, at least for now. But I got a coded message from another Clythar fugitive in Nevada. They're starting to organize, Jack. Because of what we did. Jack whistled softly, impressed. Over the past months, Lyrian had told him more about their fight. The Star Circle used the core to control not just ships, but the entire Clythar society, keeping it under a strict regime. By destroying the tracker, she hadn't just won her freedom. She'd opened a door for others to escape. He still found it hard to believe he was at the center of it all. A scrapper barely making ends meet. Have you ever thought, he started, hesitating about going back? Like, leading this Clythar revolution or something? Lyrian looked at him, her eyes shining with a mix of sadness and determination. I have, she admitted, but not now. For the first time, I feel like I have a home. Here with you. Jack felt his chest tighten, her words echoing something he never dared say out loud. He took her hand, the warmth familiar but still electric. You know I'm not exactly Mr. Perfect, right? Just a guy with a truck and a messy past. She laughed, squeezing his hand. And I'm an alien fugitive with a blown-up ship on my record. I think we're a match. He smiled, and for a moment, the world outside, the Star Circle, the sirens, the debts, just faded away. It was just him, Lyrian, and the promise of something new. They'd built a life together, small but real. Jack now worked as a mechanic in Sedona, fixing cars, and sometimes alien tech parts that showed up on the black market. Lyrian used her smarts to help other Clythar fugitives, sending coded messages and planning escape routes. They were a team, unlikely, but inseparable. The sun began to set, painting the sky red and purple. Jack and Lyrian stepped into the backyard, where a campfire crackled, the smell of burning wood blending with the cool air. They sat in camping chairs, staring at the stars. Jack thought about how much his life had changed since that night at the Desert Rose Cantina. He was no longer the man running from his past, and Lyrian was no longer just a princess or a fugitive. She was simply herself, and that was enough. "Jack," she said after a long silence, "have you ever wondered what you'd be doing if you hadn't taken me as payment?" He thought for a moment, then laughed. Probably still drinking cheap beer and owing money to half the world. But you know what? I wouldn't trade it for anything. She smiled, her filaments glowing like shooting stars. Me neither. And so ends the story of Jack and Lyrian, a human and an alien who found in each other something the entire universe couldn't offer: a home, a choice, and a chance to start over. Thanks for joining this journey full of action, emotion, and hearts beating together, even across species. If this story moved you, drop a comment with what you thought. Got ideas for the next adventure? Want more intergalactic romances, epic battles, or maybe a little desert mystery? Tell us. And if you want more stories blending courage, love, and stars, subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter of the universe. See you next time.